Welcome to the Occult Knowledge Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Carter, and in today's episode we open the door to one of the most secretive brotherhoods in human history, the Freemasons. Some say their teachings preserve ancient wisdom, hidden from the public for centuries. Others claim their influence reaches into the highest levels of global power. Are these rituals the key to enlightenment or a blueprint for control? The truth may be stranger than either side dares admit. To understand the origins of the Freemasons, we must first step back into the medieval world of Europe. The earliest records point to stoneworkers and builders who possessed skills so rare and essential that their knowledge was guarded as a kind of sacred trust. Cathedrals, castles, and great monuments rose across the continent in the 12th and 13th centuries, built with techniques ordinary labourers could neither understand nor replicate. These guilds of masons became closed circles, passing down secrets of geometry, proportion, and symbolism only to trusted initiates. Their craft was more than architecture. It was a philosophy carved into stone. The atmosphere of that time was charged with religious fervour, but also with suspicion. Knowledge itself could be dangerous. The Catholic Church sought to control which ideas were allowed to flourish. Anything that hinted at heresy or hidden power was swiftly silenced. Within this climate, guilds of skilled builders became more than tradesmen. They became keepers of mysteries. Their tools, the square and the compass, were not just practical instruments, but symbols of higher truths. The work of cutting stone became a metaphor for the shaping of the soul. By the 16th and 17th centuries, the guilds had shifted. The need for massive cathedral construction had declined, but the allure of secret brotherhoods had not. The Masonic lodges began admitting men who were not stoneworkers at all, but thinkers, philosophers, and nobles drawn to the promise of hidden wisdom. This transition marked the birth of what we now call speculative Freemasonry. Its focus moved from the literal building of monuments to the symbolic building of character and society. The lodges became sanctuaries where esoteric traditions could be preserved. Ancient wisdom, drawn from sources as varied as Egyptian mystery schools, Jewish Kabbalah, and Christian mysticism, was said to be woven into their rituals. At a time when questioning the established church could mean imprisonment or death, the lodge provided a space where new and old ideas could be shared under the cloak of secrecy. The very structure of Freemasonry, with its layers of degrees and carefully staged initiations, created both a hierarchy of knowledge and a strong bond of loyalty. The political climate of the Enlightenment further shaped the Freemasons' identity. In an age of monarchies and empires, the lodges attracted men who dreamed of liberty, equality, and the pursuit of knowledge without chains. Some historians point to Masonic lodges as breeding grounds for revolutionary thought. From the American colonies to the upheavals in France, whispers of Masonic influence can be found wherever the old order trembled. It is here, in this complex web of secret knowledge and political change, that the question arises. Were the Freemasons truly guardians of a timeless wisdom meant to uplift humanity? Or were they already laying the foundation for networks of hidden power that would operate beyond the reach of kings and churches alike? The question of what the Freemasons discovered and why their teachings have been veiled in secrecy lies at the heart of their enduring mystique. The rituals of initiation, preserved for centuries, are said to contain fragments of knowledge drawn from ancient civilizations. References to the building of Solomon's temple, the lost wisdom of Egypt, and the sacred geometry of Pythagoras are woven into the fabric of their ceremonies. Initiates are told that these allegories represent not merely stories, but instructions for aligning the human soul with cosmic order. The symbols, from the all-seeing eye to the blazing star, hint at truths hidden in plain sight. The secrecy surrounding these rituals was not accidental. Throughout history, authorities have feared movements that preserve knowledge outside their control. Religious leaders, in particular, viewed Freemasonry with suspicion. The Catholic Church issued repeated condemnations of the Brotherhood, beginning in the early 18th century, accusing it of heresy, blasphemy, and subversion. Why would a fraternity of builders and philosophers provoke such hostility unless their teachings threatened established power? The claim that Masonic rituals were harmless metaphors could not erase the fear that within their lodges men were discussing ideas forbidden by the church and monarchy alike. Reports of suppression extend beyond condemnation. Masonic texts have vanished mysteriously, their keepers silenced or exiled. Early copies of the so-called Old Charges, the manuscripts describing the duties and allegiances of Masons, were sometimes seized and destroyed. Lodges were infiltrated by spies, their activities monitored by governments afraid of sedition. In places where revolution broke out, accusations quickly followed that Masons had orchestrated events from the shadows. The secrecy surrounding their teachings made it nearly impossible to separate myth from reality, and perhaps that was the intention. What precisely was being protected? Some claim the teachings preserved fragments of Hermetic wisdom, a philosophy that taught the unity of the divine and the material. Others argue that the rituals guarded practical techniques of influence, methods of persuasion, and systems of loyalty that could give a small group outsized power. Still others whisper of occult sciences, formulas for manipulating unseen forces of nature, preserved under allegory to shield them from misuse. The pattern of suppression itself suggests that the Freemasons carried something too valuable to be allowed in open circulation. Whether it was revolutionary thought, forbidden theology, or occult science, their secrecy became their survival. But secrecy also fed suspicion, ensuring that every destroyed manuscript, every silenced Mason, and every denunciation by church or state only deepened the sense that something extraordinary was being hidden from the rest of the world. When examining the traces left behind, the evidence of something hidden beneath the surface becomes difficult to ignore. The architecture associated with Freemasonry, particularly in Europe and the Americas, is filled with clues. Government buildings, cathedrals, and even city layouts appear to follow sacred geometric principles. Washington, D.C., designed in the late 18th century, has long been cited as a prime example. The alignment of its streets, the placement of monuments, and the recurring use of Masonic symbols suggest that the city itself may have been constructed as a kind of esoteric blueprint. The square, the compass, and the all-seeing eye are not confined to lodge rooms, but stand engraved into the very fabric of nations. Beyond architecture, manuscripts and personal diaries reveal another layer of evidence. Many early Freemasons were not only builders of structures, but scholars deeply engaged with esoteric philosophy. The writings of figures like Elias Ashmole, one of the earliest recorded speculative Freemasons in 17th century England, reveal an obsession with alchemy, astrology, and hidden sciences. His journals connect the Masonic tradition not just with medieval guilds, but with the entire lineage of Western occultism. This is not casual coincidence. It suggests an intentional preservation of teachings considered too volatile for mainstream theology. Eyewitness accounts also complicate the narrative. Initiates who broke their vows of silence spoke of elaborate rituals involving blindfolds, symbolic deaths and rebirths, and oaths taken under threat of dire consequences. While critics claim these were mere theatrics, believers insist that such experiences were designed to awaken higher states of consciousness. The secrecy around these ceremonies and the harsh penalties once attached to revealing them imply that something more profound than moral lessons was being imparted. Anomalous artifacts linked to Freemasonry also appear in surprising places. Medallions, tracing boards, and ritual tools are filled with symbols that scholars trace back to Egypt, Babylon, and ancient Israel. The blending of cultural symbols separated by thousands of years raises difficult questions. How did stonemasons in medieval Europe inherit imagery from civilizations supposedly long disconnected from their world? Was this the result of deliberate preservation by secret channels, or does it point to a far deeper continuity of hidden knowledge moving beneath the surface of recorded history? Even the way Freemasonry itself has survived lends weight to the argument. Despite waves of suppression, exposure, and conspiracy, the Brotherhood has persisted across continents and centuries, adapting to each new environment while guarding the same symbols and allegories. The very endurance of the organization suggests a purpose greater than fellowship. To endure through fire and condemnation, something worth protecting must have been at its core, hidden just beneath the layer of allegory and ritual. Patterns begin to emerge when we compare Masonic traditions to the myths and symbols of civilizations that never had direct contact with one another. The square and compass, so central to Freemasonry, echo ancient Egyptian depictions of the builder gods Ptah and Thoth, who were said to shape creation through measurement and precision. In Hindu cosmology, similar instruments appear in depictions of the architect of the universe, Vishvakarman, who holds tools of construction that symbolize divine order. Across cultures separated by oceans and centuries, the act of building becomes a metaphor for aligning human beings with cosmic truth. The story of a slain master builder, central to Masonic initiation, also has echoes across history. In the lodge, it is the figure of Hiram Biff, the legendary architect of Solomon's Temple, who dies and is reborn through the loyalty of his companions. Yet similar myths appear in the death of Osiris in Egypt, the sacrifice of Dionysus in Greece, and even the crucifixion of Christ in Christianity. A pattern reveals itself in which the builder, teacher, or god suffers death only to return transformed, offering wisdom to those who follow. Such mythic parallels suggest that Freemasonry is not merely borrowing stories, but consciously preserving an archetype that runs through the spiritual DNA of humanity. Architecture itself holds further clues. Gothic cathedrals in Europe, believed to have been constructed by early Masonic guilds, are filled with sacred geometry, numerological patterns, and symbolic alignments that mirror the cosmos. The rose windows, the proportions of nave and altar, the use of light and shadow, all point to knowledge of astronomy and mathematics used not for function alone, but for spiritual initiation. These designs find echoes in pyramids of Egypt, ziggurats of Mesopotamia, and the stepped temples of Central America. Different builders, distant lands, and yet the same impulse to encode hidden truths into stone. Ritual practices show striking similarities as well. Masonic initiation involves darkness, symbolic death, and eventual rebirth into light. Comparable rites are documented in the Eleusinian mysteries of ancient Greece, where initiates experienced a ritual death before being shown secret symbols of life and renewal. Indigenous shamanic traditions from the Americas to Siberia also speak of initiatory deaths and resurrections as a passage into higher knowledge. These parallels are too consistent to dismiss as coincidence. It is within these echoes, these repeated patterns across civilizations, that one begins to see a larger picture forming. Freemasonry may serve as one of the last surviving vessels of an ancient current, preserving fragments of a truth that has flowed through Egypt, Babylon, Greece, and beyond. Whether this current represents universal archetypes of the human psyche or the survival of an actual ancient knowledge system remains a question. But its presence across time and culture suggests that the teachings of the Freemasons reach back into a tradition far older than medieval guilds, perhaps as old as civilization itself. The way institutions have responded to Freemasonry reveals as much as the rituals themselves. For centuries, religious and academic authorities have sought to frame the Brotherhood as either harmless fraternities or dangerous cults, often with little nuance in between. The Catholic Church issued some of its earliest bans in the early 18th century, labelling the Freemasons as heretical and accusing them of conspiring against faith and authority. Papal decrees warned the faithful that joining a lodge meant spiritual ruin. The intensity of these denunciations raises questions. If Freemasonry were only symbolic play-acting, why would the most powerful religious institution in the world see it as such a threat? The academic world has often taken a similarly dismissive stance. Historians tend to explain away Masonic influence as exaggerated conspiracy, insisting the lodges were simply private clubs where Enlightenment ideals of reason and fraternity could be exchanged. They admit Freemasonry provided networks that connected thinkers, politicians, and revolutionaries, but deny any deeper occult significance. Their explanations often stop at coincidence, treating the recurrence of symbols and myths as harmless borrowing, without asking why these borrowings appear so consistently, or why secrecy was so fiercely guarded. The problem lies in the boundaries that official scholarship places around acceptable inquiry. A historian who openly suggests that Freemasonry might preserve hidden esoteric teachings risks their reputation. A scientist who entertains the possibility that sacred geometry reflects real principles of energy or consciousness may find their research unfunded or their career halted. Taboo topics are rarely debated on evidence alone, but on fear of ridicule. This dynamic builds a wall of denial around certain areas of human history. Once labelled fringe, they are excluded from serious investigation, leaving their mysteries to be debated outside the halls of academia. Funding also plays a decisive role. Universities and research institutes rely on grants from governments, corporations, and religious foundations. Topics that challenge the authority of those very powers are unlikely to receive support. If Freemasonry is linked to revolutionary movements, to philosophies that empower the individual over the institution, then research into its occult dimensions could be seen as destabilizing. It becomes safer to dismiss the subject than to confront it. This wall of denial does not erase the evidence. Instead, it creates a paradox. The more that authorities ridicule or suppress inquiry into Freemasonry's deeper meanings, the more people suspect that something vital is being hidden. The persistence of secrecy, the continuity of symbols, and the weight of centuries of condemnation all suggest that behind the official explanations lies a body of knowledge too disruptive to be openly admitted. Whether by design or by fear, the institutions of church and academy act not as neutral investigators, but as gatekeepers of what humanity is permitted to know. The ideas that fall outside official narratives are often the ones that captivate the imagination most powerfully. Fringe theories about Freemasonry propose that its rituals and symbols are not just allegories for moral growth, but fragments of technologies and sciences that predate our current understanding of civilization. Some researchers suggest that the emphasis on sacred geometry hints at a lost system for harnessing energy from the natural world. The precise proportions used in temples, cathedrals, and monuments may not only inspire awe, but interact with unseen forces in ways modern science cannot fully explain. If true, then the teachings of the Freemasons may preserve the blueprint of an ancient science of consciousness and matter. Another theory suggests that Freemasonry connects to hidden traditions of advanced civilizations that existed long before the rise of recorded history. Echoes of Atlantis often emerge in these discussions. According to this view, remnants of Atlantean knowledge survived the cataclysm through secret societies and priesthoods, eventually filtering into the rituals of the Freemasons. The focus on initiation, rebirth, and enlightenment mirrors descriptions of mystery schools said to have thrived in that forgotten age. To some, the Masons represent the last visible thread, tying us back to a civilization that was both technologically advanced and spiritually awakened. Others interpret the Masonic system as an encoded guide to human transformation, a kind of map for unlocking latent powers of the mind and spirit. The death and rebirth of Hiram Abiff, the master builder of Solomon's temple, is seen not only as allegory, but as instruction for dissolving the ego and awakening higher states of consciousness. In this sense, Masonic teachings might be less about building physical temples and more about constructing a temple of the soul capable of perceiving dimensions beyond ordinary reality. A more controversial fringe theory links Freemasonry to contact with non-human intelligences. Some claim that the language of Enochian magic, the presence of celestial symbolism, and the all-seeing eye point to knowledge that was given, not invented. Were the early Masons the inheritors of communication with beings outside the human sphere, whether divine messengers, ancient gods, or entities from other worlds? To believers, this possibility explains why the Brotherhood has remained so guarded. Such knowledge could upend every assumption about who we are and where we came from. What unites these theories is their refusal to accept surface explanations. They insist that the persistence of Masonic rituals and symbols across centuries is not an accident, but evidence of a continuity of hidden knowledge. Whether that knowledge is lost science, ancient consciousness technology, or a record of contact with higher intelligences, the theories suggest that the Masons hold keys to truths humanity has been denied. And perhaps the real reason for secrecy lies not in the Brotherhood's desire to protect itself, but in the explosive implications of what their teachings may actually reveal. The notion that forgotten wisdom survives or vanishes by accident is difficult to accept when the evidence of systematic erasure stretches across history. Libraries, archives, and temples containing ancient texts have been destroyed with such precision that the pattern suggests design rather than chance. The burning of the Library of Alexandria, the suppression of Gnostic Gospels, and the persecution of heretical sects are examples often cited as part of a broader campaign to eliminate ideas that might threaten authority. When examined through this lens, the secrecy of Freemasonry appears less like an odd tradition and more like a response to centuries of intellectual warfare. Throughout the medieval and early modern periods, the Church exercised nearly total control over what was considered legitimate knowledge. Manuscripts that challenged official doctrine were banned, altered, or destroyed. Scientists like Galileo were threatened for observations that contradicted dogma. Within this climate, the lodges provided a refuge for teachings that might otherwise have been silenced. Their secrecy was not simply an indulgence, but a shield against a system intent on rewriting history. By wrapping their wisdom in allegory, Freemasons could preserve truths while evading the reach of inquisitors and kings. Governments also had a stake in erasing knowledge that could empower individuals. Ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity, which later became rallying cries of revolutions, circulated within Masonic lodges long before they reached the streets. Such concepts undermined the divine right of monarchs and the absolute power of empires. To those in control, Freemasonry was more than a private society. It was a breeding ground for sedition. Suppressing its influence was not only about theology, but about protecting the structures of worldly power. Secret societies themselves may have played a role in managing what knowledge was allowed to survive. Competing groups, from the Jesuits to the Rosicrucians, held their own visions of truth, and often worked to discredit or absorb rival traditions. The Masons were not the only keepers of hidden wisdom, but they became one of the most visible. The conflicts between these orders left behind layers of erased manuscripts, half-revealed symbols, and scattered traditions that modern researchers struggle to piece together. This possibility of intentional erasure raises a troubling question. If knowledge is power, then the ability to decide what is remembered and what is forgotten becomes a tool of domination. What we call history may not be a record of what truly happened, but of what was permitted to remain. The Freemasons, through their guarded rituals and persistent survival, stand as a reminder that vast portions of human wisdom may have been deliberately buried. The question is not only what they preserved, but what else has been destroyed, and by whose command. If even part of the suppressed knowledge preserved by the Freemasons is genuine, its implications are staggering. At the most immediate level, it challenges the way we understand authority. If hidden wisdom about human consciousness, sacred geometry, or even lost sciences has been deliberately withheld, then history itself becomes less a story of progress and more a story of control. Those who decide what can be known effectively decide what humanity can become. Knowledge becomes the highest form of power, more potent than armies or wealth, because it shapes the very limits of imagination. Consider the spiritual dimension. If Masonic allegories truly encode teachings about inner transformation, then humanity may hold within itself untapped potential capable of awakening higher states of awareness. The temple described in their rituals is not merely an ancient building, but the human soul itself. If that is true, then every individual has the capacity to construct their own temple of wisdom, independent of churches, monarchs, or external authorities. Such a realization could shift power dramatically, taking it from the few and placing it in the hands of the many. This alone would explain centuries of hostility toward the Brotherhood. On a cultural level, the implications stretch further. If architectural symbols and city designs were consciously created to harness or reflect hidden energies, then the very spaces we inhabit could influence our minds and societies in ways unrecognized by mainstream science. What if monuments, government buildings, or even urban layouts function as more than symbols, but as instruments of unseen influence? The idea may sound speculative, yet the consistency with which sacred geometry appears in both ancient and modern structures suggests an intention too deliberate to dismiss. The possibility of lost civilizations casts the implications into an even broader light. If Freemasonry truly preserves fragments of Atlantean or pre-Diluvian knowledge, then human history is far older and more complex than accepted narratives admit. Our understanding of origins, of what civilizations achieved, and of how catastrophes reshaped the world would need to be rewritten. Humanity might not be climbing toward progress from primitive beginnings, but recovering slowly from forgotten heights. At its deepest level, the knowledge said to be preserved within Freemasonry points to sovereignty of the human spirit. If individuals can awaken, construct their inner temple, and perceive the hidden order of the universe, then they no longer require intercession by church or state. The implications are revolutionary. Control through secrecy, suppression, or fear loses its hold when people discover that the greatest power is already within them. This is perhaps the most unsettling truth of all, for it undermines every system built on hierarchy and dependency. If the veil were ever torn away, society itself would have to confront the reality that humanity's destiny has been shaped not only by what we were told, but by what we were forbidden to know. The Freemasons remain both guardians of mystery and targets of suspicion, their presence woven through centuries of history, yet never fully understood. To some, they are a fraternity of builders who simply carried forward allegories of moral conduct. To others, they are the inheritors of ancient sciences, spiritual technologies, and cosmic truths carefully concealed in ritual and symbol. The endurance of their order, despite centuries of condemnation, secrecy, and accusation, hints that something of value lies at the heart of their tradition, something that has survived inquisitions, revolutions, and modern skepticism. What becomes clear is that Freemasonry is more than it appears. Whether as a vessel for esoteric wisdom, a network for revolutionary ideas, or a subtle architecture of influence, its teachings continue to provoke wonder and fear. The very symbols that decorate their temples and tracing boards now cover currency, monuments, and institutions of power. The square and compass, the all-seeing eye, the unfinished pyramid, these images confront us daily, reminders of a hidden current running beneath the surface of ordinary life. Are they benign emblems of fraternity, or signals of a deeper influence shaping the world unseen? Perhaps the most haunting aspect of the Freemasons' legacy is the paradox it represents. If they are keepers of wisdom, why conceal it from humanity? And if their secrecy has been exaggerated, why has that secrecy been maintained so fiercely for so long? Every destroyed manuscript, every whispered accusation, every symbol carved into stone without explanation feeds the sense that history is incomplete. What is omitted may be as important as what remains. In the end, the Freemasons embody a timeless struggle over knowledge itself. Who has the right to seek it? Who has the power to preserve it? And who has the authority to decide what must remain hidden? These questions echo beyond the lodges and into every institution that governs human life. The possibility that enlightenment has been withheld for control, or that humanity itself has been denied access to truths about consciousness, the cosmos, and our origins, remains a chilling thought. Perhaps the real secret is not whether Freemasons control the world, but whether they carry fragments of a lost inheritance meant for all people. If so, then their rituals and symbols are not just oaths of brotherhood, but echoes of an ancient call, urging us to remember that wisdom, once hidden, can still be found. The greatest power may not lie in those who guard the secrets, but in those who dare to seek them. Thanks for listening. This has been another episode of the Occult Knowledge Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you'd like to support the show, subscribe to the Forbidden Knowledge Network on Patreon. Subscribe now.